This race conversation is cumbersome, and it's triggering, and it's no one has answers. I get it, but we on this one, we're going to give you answers. The name of this episode is The Answers to the Race Question. You're on Off the Plantation, and we're going to journey towards freedom. In this episode, we're going to journey towards freedom on the issue of race. And we're going to find out, fundamentally, where does this whole issue come from? What you should know is that the race issue is a social construct. And, believe it or not, it's literally a false narrative. Now, y'all, come on, Kev, how could you say race is a false narrative? I'm looking at my skin, I'm looking at other folks' skin. Hey, it's real. Chill on that for a second. Let's go through it. So the whole idea with a false narrative is those things that we hold dear, near, and true, that we believe are true. If they're indeed not true, in other words, if they are manifestly false, then what we're holding dear, near, and true is deemed a false narrative. Now, stick with me on this, because you will see clear as day that the whole issue of race, all of our concerns about race as a construct, as an issue, as the thing that we need to go to war for, that we need to fight over, that we need to fight in the streets about, that we need to hate others about, it's a false narrative, babe. So we're gonna unpack that so you can understand why I would make such an audacious statement. So first of all, let's understand, I'm not saying that the way that you hold it or the way other people hold it is not real. You have real feelings about race, no doubt. Most of the world does. Most of the world has for generations now. But it is, because it is a social construct that's only been around for about 180 years, it's completely a false narrative. It's a made-up narrative. What my hope is that after you see where it comes from, why it's here, and all of that, that you will be able to put together in your own mind, I can't continue to hold this issue as I've held it in the past, because it's not constructive for me to do that. Okay? So this is going to help everybody on the spectrum. Conservative, liberals, leftists, progressives, race baiters, haters, everybody's going to be helped on how we come to grips with this whole issue after you see the roots of it, and after you understand why it's held in such esteem. And I say esteem because there's a lot of folks really bow at the altar of race. Everything that they think, feel, believe, remember revolves around race. So let's get into it. So here's the deal. So ancient biblical times, let's go all the way back. Let's start so we don't skip any steps in between. So if we go back to ancient biblical times, we understand that, and again, I'm speaking from the standpoint of ancient biblical times and therefore Bible-related stories. So we understand that there was Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, and then there was this fall of all humankind. And as a result of the fall, then the whole world kind of tilted, right? And there was the entering in then of this thing that we call evil, all right? And so evil then manifests itself in a lot of forms. One of the forms, as populations began to grow, one of the forms was tribalism. In other words, there were people that if you went too far into their territory, they would capture you and they would enslave you. And they would make you a servant, basically, of their tribe. They would enslave you. And so that's tribalism. You don't belong here. You wandered a little bit too far, bro. You right over that territory. You ours. And so that's what was happening. So we call that tribalism. So that happened multiple times. You can read about all of the accounts, all of the wars, all of the things that they fought over in ancient biblical times, and then if you accelerate that a little bit forward, you understand that that various ethnicities, people that have sort of left the tribal type communities and then started to manifest in these various parts of the world, were recognized as different ethnicities. So there was an understanding that there was one human race, but because of various geographies around the planet, some colder, some hotter, some et cetera, that there was a level of adaptation that then you would get different ethnicities. And due to adaptation, you would get, various melanin counts to accommodate for the various environments that people were subjected to. And melanin is just one of those things that colors your skin, right? And so this is how people accounted for people coming from other parts of the world. They saw them as different, and they saw them based on melanin. You look very different to me, and your hair is very different than mine, and you have a whole different language. So therefore, your ethnicity is of something else, right? So we had tribalism, and there were wars and lots of fighting over that. And then we had ethnic strife. So ethnicities would say, well, you're too different from us, and therefore I'm going to. I feel more comfortable. I feel more close to the various ethnic community that I'm a part of. This is, and because of that, I don't really want to welcome you in here like that. So this is kind of ethnic strife. Now, ethnic strife could actually, boil over into, cultural strife between ethnicities and, little fiefdoms and little, boundaries, if you will, even within cities, little boundaries that could subsist because we're an ethnic community. We're proud. We're culturally relevant amongst ourselves, but we don't really want these other ethnic expressions to come in here. So we call that ethnic strife. So you had this all the way from ancient times, all the way up until the late 1700s. In the late 1700s, there was a guy by the name of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach was a naturalist, materialist, scientist type. And he had gone around the world and had really done a lot of studies on various geographies and ethnicities. And he says, really, we need to figure out a way to do some sort of classification. He said, let's call it a race classification based on these different areas that I've been to. At that time, he had discovered he had gone over the multiple continents, and the continents that were most populated were just 5. And so, he says, look, for this continent and Africa, we're going to call that the Ethiopian ethnicity or Ethiopian race. For parts of Asia, we call that Mongolian. For parts of Europe, we call that Caucasian. These were all geographically distinct ethnic types and what he called race. And he made the first race classification. Now, here's what's interesting about Johann Friedrich Blumenbach's work. He says it had nothing to do with skin color. It had nothing to do with the amount of melanin or lack thereof. It was strictly based on geography. So African were classified as the race of Ethiopians, Europeans, a race of Caucasian, et cetera, et cetera. So that was it. 5 race classifications what he came up with. And so that was the first real significant, distinction of race being actually being part of the human, of the nomenclature for trying to distinguish, between people groups. The first time was late 1770s with Johann. That was where race was actually entered in as a way that we can begin to distinguish between people groups. So, so what we call race today, uh, is fairly new. Johann was the first one. Now, there were subsequent, scientists and naturalists and materialists that studied humans that came after Johann. I'll get to that in a second. But one of the other things that Johann wanted to make clear is he says, "Look, I've studied cranial cavities of all of these various, races in these five distinct groups." And he said, "There, I always get asked about the Ethiopian race, those on the African continent." And he said, "There is no distinction between the Africans, the Ethiopian race, and any other race. Cognitively and intellectually, all of them are exactly the same." So he made no distinction between, humanness. And, he said, basically, we're all saying you're a human race, baby. I mean, and this little distinction that I have is because of different geographies, and we just want to classify them. So that was that. About 50 years later, there's a guy who then came up through the exact same ranks as Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. His name was Charles Darwin. And Darwin comes up, and he's like, he's trying to make his mark among the European aristocrats. And because of that, he wanted to, try to make the Europeans feel proud and unique and distinct. And he wanted to, basically blowing smoke up their skirts to so he can be, accepted in that upper crust with the Europeans. So Charles Darwin comes around, and he of course he does this journey, and he does all kinds of classifications with plants and all kinds of animals and all kinds of things, and he develops this theory of evolution. So in doing this, though, what Darwin did, first of all, he had the exact same protocol. He came in the exact same protocol as Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, and because of that, he was very familiar with all of Johann's work. He understood there was no distinction between humans. Yeah, Charles Darwin. That was the starting point. But he wanted to prove a point and become part of this upper crust, elitist, aristocrat type European, club. And he wanted to make his mark. He wanted to, show some distinction. So in his theories, he says, "Oh, look, there is no God." This whole thing that we everybody came from an Adam and Eve, and yeah, no, human race is all we're all distinct. And he says, the bottom line is, because there is no God, and there was, we didn't come from the same place. He says, literally, what happened is, you see how sophisticated we European are, we European Caucasians are. Literally, we were the first to have evolved. He says, all ethnicities, all races evolve in rates and stages over time. This is the theory of evolution. And so he says, we whites, white Europeans, we Caucasians, we evolve first. So we're the cat's meow, we're at the top of the heap, And he says every other race that comes after us are a variation of the same theme, but there's slight degradation every time. Every time. He says, "But we white Europeans, we're supreme." This is where the notion of white supremacy comes from. Yes, there's such a thing. Darwin actually, for the first time in human history, because of his evolutionary theories, and we know their theories, and they're wrought with all kinds of inconsistencies and all of that. But we can debate that some other time. But because of his theories, he actually introduced for the first time in human history that no, we're not equal. Humans are not equal. Whites are supreme. This is fundamental to his work. So, if you're a strict Darwinist, you this is what you fundamentally believe, because it's part of the the belief set that comes from Darwinist and Darwinist thinking. Okay, so because so again, he had some motivation though. He wanted to basically ingratiate himself to the European aristocrats and that upper crust, and so he had to blow smoke up their skirt by telling them, "You're the first to have evolved. I'm of course in this clique. We all the top." And then he says, and so because all of these, there's variations of the same theme, and each time each other race classification, race that evolves, it says a slightly less degradation from the original order, us white Caucasian Europeans. When you get down to blacks, he says, actually, matter of fact, if you look at blacks now, look, they're still subhuman. He says, they're synonymous with apes, gorillas, and savages. Now, this is all documented in Darwin's second book, The Descent of Man, and it's all there. Okay, and so he takes him. He says, look, blacks are subhuman. So with that, that is the instantiation not only of white supremacy. We white Caucasians, we the first to have evolved, but the instantiation of racism. Racism, as you understand today, is when you have, when people are treated in the exact same situation, people are treated dramatically different. What Darwin said, when he said blacks are subhuman, apes, gorillas, and savages, what he said is, of course, you can't treat them equal to anyone else, let alone us white Caucasian Europeans. They're still subhuman. What are you talking about? You're still trying to climb the evolutionary scale, so you can't. So he basically enshrined treating blacks completely different at all times, because they are completely different. They're not. There's no such thing as one human race that we all have in common. And so Darwin is the one that actually brought in, because it had never been done before him, white supremacy as a real scientific distinction. Did people maybe think that they were superior before Darwin ever said, yeah, of course, yeah, this is part of, the ethnic strife, is part of, but he brought it in as a scientific distinction. Whites are superior. And for the first time in human history, he brought in as a scientific distinction, blacks are subhuman. This is where it came from. So because of that, and since that time, blacks have been treated dramatically different than any other race. This is where it started. So what's important, though, is that everyone who is looking at this, that you understand that this is a social construct created by literally one man, but it was popularized because of his distinction within the scientific community, and therefore it was adopted and therefore carried through. This is how we get to white supremacy and racism. This is where it comes from. So, additionally, Darwin, literally said that you can't treat blacks the same. Even though he read all of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach's work, because they're exact same pedigree, he basically concocted this whole scheme, and saying, no, blacks aren't cognitively the same, and they're intellectually, they're subhuman. They're synonymous with apes, gorillas, and savages. And so, because of his notoriety and because he was readily accepted by the aristocrats within Europe at the time, we have this whole feeling of white supremacy and this whole feeling of race as a real distinction, even though it's not. It's a social construct. Even though today, scientists and DNA strands will tell you at this very moment that the only distinction between one human being and another, as it relates to skin color, is less. It's a fraction of a percent of DNA. A fraction of a percent. Everything else, cognitive abilities, intellectual capacity, and all that some of that, it of course varies, but the intellect, every other component of human behavior, one race. We are one human race. Now, for some, that's an inconvenient truth. For some who are race baiters and all that, man, no, I don't want to believe that, man. No, 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 no. We better than them, they better than us, whatever, whatever. Look, you can fact check. Go read Darwin's Descent of Man. You see where it came from. Is where it came from. He was the first renowned scientist in human history to make such an audacious claim about race distinction. And he was only able to do that because he was the first, as you recall, to bring forth this evolutionary theory that says, look, we evolve, all races evolved, and he was the first to say that Caucasians, Europeans, evolved first. So that's and because of that, then we carry that through. We carry that now through all of blacks trying to just get look, treat us like equal. Just treat us like we're human. Treat us like we have the capacity, we have the resourcefulness to be able to compete at anything and anything. Can you just treat us like everything else? But some people, at some level, I know people don't go around thinking of Darwin, but they, with Darwinism sort of being enshrined throughout, K through 12 education and then even higher education. At some level, Darwinism rears its ugly head, and you really believe that just because of skin color, we're different. Now, we all have different experiences. Our ethnicities and culture, yeah, it's different. But fundamentally, as human beings, there is no difference. There's none. There is no difference. And we give too much credence to skin color. At a fraction of 1% of DNA, it means nothing. Nothing on the human scale. And yet, we want to hate others, we want to love others, we want to treat others different based on such an arbitrary, characteristic. Skin color. When you look at where this stuff comes from, and you look at how it's been thoroughly infused throughout the globe, and how everybody has this narrative about race and skin color, as if it really, really means something. I'm hopeful this will help you to begin to really put it in its proper perspective. It only means something because we have attributed meaning to it. In other words, we have at some level agreed that we're very different human beings, and some people are just innately different. And because of that, it creates these huge race distinctions, and especially as it relates to skin color. Globally, we see skin color as being the primary now attribute that people are looking for to make big decisions. Well, I want somebody that has this kind of skin color to be, because they've been underrepresented for so long, we want them to be, our CEO or sit on the board of directors or this and that. Forget meritocracy. Forget, merit and competency. Just put them there. This has gone too far. We have come to worship race. as a real distinction when race fundamentally is a complete false narrative. It is not real. It's a social construct that's been around for about 180 years. What do we do with that? We need to recognize recognize it being what it is, and recognize that we're all human beings just trying to figure this thing out called life. We're all in the soup together, and yeah, we may have been raised differently, may have different cultural ideas and identities. But the difference between us and any other human being is nebulous. We all have full capacity as human beings. So let's put it in its proper perspective. Let's learn from it. Let's not continue to thrive on worshiping it or making it the real thing that needs to be looked at. And let's just begin to say, hey, we all have different experiences. We're raised in different households, raised in different communities, raised in different cultures. We get it, but fundamentally, we're all human. This whole idea that I'm less than you or whatever because of skin color and all this is ridiculous. Can we just do that? And then can we just learn to embrace one another in love as being part of the human race, the human experience? Can we just do that? If we recognize that we all come from the same lineage through the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and all come out of that, then it would be a lot easier for us to recognize that and to just love one another. It's okay. Embrace one another. Support one another. But if we adopt at some level this Darwinian perspective, it's not going to be possible, baby. Fam, I'm telling you, Darwinism that then turns into Marxism, communism, socialism, it's all destructive, demonic, and it's going to keep us divided. So let's do better because we don't want to be divided. We want to be free.